Imagine living without fear of judgment, without being controlled by negative emotions, and without carrying the weight of the past. Imagine being someone who nothing and no one can shake, because you finally understand what is behind your pain, your reactions, and your thoughts. This may seem impossible, but Carl Jung showed us that there is a way to achieve this state of true emotional freedom. Most people spend their lives being affected by words, attitudes, and external circumstances without realizing that the root of the problem is never in the outside world, but rather within them. That's why some people face enormous challenges without losing their peace, while others crumble in the face of small difficulties. The difference is not in what happens, but in the way each one interprets and reacts to what happens. Jung believed that when we understand the hidden mechanisms that govern our mind, we acquire a power that makes us unshakable. It's not about ignoring emotions or pretending that nothing affects us, but rather deeply understanding the origin of our fears, insecurities, and pain so that they lose control over us. In this video, we will explore Carl Jung's revolutionary ideas and reveal how you can apply this knowledge to free yourself from what hurts you, limits you, and prevents you from living fully. If you want to learn how to deal with life in a way that nothing and no one ever hurts you again, stay until the end and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Now, get ready to see your own mind in a way you may never have imagined before. Carl Jung believed that much of human suffering does not come from external circumstances, but rather from the lack of knowledge we have about ourselves. When we don't understand our own mind, we become vulnerable to the opinions of others, the fears that control us, and the pains we carry around without even realizing it. That's why some people seem to be overwhelmed by challenges, while others manage to get through the same situations with strength and balance. The difference is in the awareness that each one has about herself. From childhood, we are shaped by external influences. We grew up hearing what we should or shouldn't do, how we should behave, what it means to be a good person. Gradually, we begin to build an identity based more on the expectations of others than on our true essence. We create masks to be accepted, we repress emotions that we consider inappropriate, and without realizing it, we move away from what we really are. This adaptation process may seem harmless, but it comes at a price. Everything we repress does not disappear, it just stays hidden in the unconscious, waiting for the right moment to manifest. And it is precisely this hidden part of our mind that makes us vulnerable. If you don't understand why you react angrily in certain situations, why certain comments hurt you so much, or why you're afraid of abandonment, those emotions end up controlling you. You become hostage to your own emotional triggers, without even realizing that there is an alternative. Jung called this hidden part of our psyche the shadow. It is formed by everything we deny in ourselves, whether out of fear, shame, or simply because we have been taught that we should not be a certain way. The problem is that the shadow does not disappear just because we pretend that it does not exist. On the contrary, the more we ignore it, the stronger it becomes. It manifests itself in subtle ways, in exaggerated reactions to certain people, in irrational fears, in repetitive patterns of behavior. And most importantly, it makes us vulnerable to the outside world. Imagine that, from a young age, you learn that expressing anger is wrong. To be accepted, you have become accustomed to repressing this emotion, telling yourself that you are someone calm and patient. However, repressed anger does not go away. It just finds other ways to manifest itself. Maybe you hold resentment for a long time and then explode at unexpected moments. You may develop a tendency to avoid conflict at all costs, even when you need to impose yourself. Or, even worse, you may be extremely affected whenever you see someone expressing anger, because that emotion, which you have repressed so much, continues to exist within you. This is just one example of how the shadow can make you vulnerable. The same happens with insecurities, traumas, and unresolved fears. If you feel like you need the approval of others to feel good about yourself, any criticism can destroy you. If you are afraid of rejection, any sign of withdrawal can cause you disproportionate suffering. And this is how we become prisoners of forces that we do not even recognize. True emotional freedom comes when we stop running away from our own mind and begin to understand it. When we look at our shadow with courage, something striking happens. What hurt us begins to lose its strength. Instead of being hostages of repressed emotions, we learn to integrate them, transforming them into sources of power and self-knowledge. But how to do this in practice? How to recognize the hidden aspects of our psyche and learn to deal with them in a healthy way? The answer lies in a process that Jung called individuation, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Individuation is a profound and transformative process. Jung believed that human beings are born with immense potential, but that, throughout life, they fragment to adapt to the demands of society. We lose touch with our essence and start to live under layers of conditioning, limiting beliefs, and unresolved traumas. However, individuation allows us to recover this totality. This path is not about becoming someone different, but rather about removing what was never part of you. It is a process of self-discovery where, little by little, you begin to realize that many of your insecurities, fears, and automatic reactions are not really yours, but rather programmed responses that have been imposed over time. One of the most powerful aspects of this process is shadow integration. When you recognize and accept the parts of yourself that you have tried to hide for so long, you begin to free yourself from the unconscious influence they have had on you. This means that things that once affected you deeply begin to lose strength. Criticism is no longer a personal attack. The fear of failure decreases. The feeling of inadequacy dissolves, because you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. But there is an important detail: this process requires courage. Looking inside is not always comfortable. At times, you may come across truths that you would rather avoid. You may realize that certain pains that you blamed others for causing actually came from internal wounds that were never healed. You may find that many of your frustrations come from unrealistic expectations that you have created yourself. And this is one of the most challenging points of individuation, taking full responsibility for oneself. This does not mean blaming yourself or ignoring external difficulties, but rather understanding that the way you interpret and react to the world is something that is within your control. And that's where the real transformation happens. When you realize that no one can truly hurt you without your permission, a new level of freedom opens up before you. This does not mean that you become insensitive or indifferent, but rather that you develop a level of consciousness so deep that nothing can reach you in the same way as before. If someone insults you, you can simply see that insult as a projection of the other, and not as something that defines who you are. If a plan doesn't go as expected, you understand that this is not a failure, but rather a learning opportunity. If a person withdraws, you understand that this is part of the nature of life, rather than seeing it as a personal rejection. This state of emotional balance does not mean that you will never feel pain again, but that you will know how to deal with any situation in a way that it does not destroy you. You stop reacting automatically and start choosing your answers consciously. And that changes everything. Individuation is what makes you whole again. It's what allows you to walk through the world without carrying unnecessary weights, without being a slave to your emotions, and without needing external validation to feel complete. But to consolidate this transformation, there is one last essential step: the daily practice of self-observation and self-mastery. That's what we're going to explore next. Self-observation and self-mastery are the keys to transforming knowledge into true change. There is no point in understanding Jung's concepts if, on a daily basis, we continue to react in the same way, being affected by the same triggers and repeating the same patterns. That's why self-knowledge needs to be an ongoing process, a daily practice, and not just a pretty theory. It all starts with awareness. Most people live on autopilot without questioning their own thoughts and emotions. They react without understanding why. They get angry without realizing the source of this anger. They feel insecurity without knowing that it comes from an unconscious belief created years ago. When you start to really observe yourself, you realize that many of these reactions are not conscious choices, but rather automatic responses that can be modified. The first step is to develop the habit of pausing before reacting. Whenever a strong emotion arises, whether it's anger, fear, frustration, or sadness, instead of getting carried away by it, stop for a moment and ask yourself, why am I feeling this? What is this emotion trying to show me? That simple pause starts to change the game, because you get out of reactive mode and into conscious mode. At first, it can be difficult. You may find yourself reacting automatically and only realize it later. But this is part of the process. Over time, this pause becomes natural, and you begin to have more control over your emotions. You find that you don't have to respond immediately to a provocative comment, that you don't have to entertain negative thoughts, and that you can choose how to handle each situation. Another essential aspect of self-mastery is learning to observe oneself without judgment. Many people avoid this process because they are afraid of what they will find inside themselves. They don't want to acknowledge their own insecurities, their contradictions, or the feelings they've repressed for so long. But Jung teaches us that true transformation only happens when we have the courage to look inward without fear. When you observe yourself with curiosity rather than self-punishment, you begin to see your behaviors and emotions more clearly. Instead of blaming yourself for feeling angry, you understand that anger has a message for you. Instead of feeling weak for being afraid, you investigate where that fear comes from. In this way, you stop being controlled by your emotions and start using them as tools for growth. The practice of self-observation also helps to undo limiting beliefs. Many of the ideas we carry about ourselves are not absolute truths, but stories that we learn to believe throughout life. If you believe that you are not good enough, that you will always be rejected, or that you will never get something you want, these unconscious thoughts shape your reality. But when you start questioning them, you realize that they are just mental constructions that can be re-signified. The secret for this transformation to be real and lasting is repetition. Just like any other habit, the way you think and react has been reinforced over the years. This means that changing these patterns takes time and practice. But every day that you observe yourself, every time you choose a more mindful response instead of an automatic reaction, you strengthen that new mindset. Over time, something powerful happens. You become the person who leads your own mind, rather than being led by it. Your emotions no longer overwhelm you. The judgments of others lose their power over you. Life's challenges keep arising, but you are no longer shaken in the same way. You find that you can handle any situation without losing your inner peace. And when you reach that level of self-mastery, you realize that nothing and no one can ever hurt you again. But there's one last point that needs to be understood for this emotional freedom to be complete, and that's what we're going to talk about next. There is one last essential element to achieve true emotional freedom: detachment. But be careful. Detachment does not mean coldness, indifference, or lack of interest in life. Rather, it is a deeper, more mature way of relating to the world, where you do not cling too much to expectations, results, or external opinions. Jung shows us that much of our suffering comes from trying to control what is out of our reach. We want people to act the way we expect, for situations to happen as we plan, for nothing to get out of our control. But the reality is that the world doesn't work like that. The more we cling to these illusions of control, the more suffering we create for ourselves. Emotional detachment doesn't mean that you stop caring, but rather that you learn to accept reality as it is. You understand that people are as they are, not as you would like them to be. You realize that things won't always go as planned, and that's okay. You stop relying on external validation to feel good about yourself, because your security comes from within. When you reach this state, you realize that nothing and no one can really hurt you. Criticism no longer affects you in the same way, because you understand that it reflects more on the person who makes it than on you. Losses are no longer devastating, because you understand that everything in life is impermanent. Frustrations subside, because you don't expect life to be perfect all the time. This doesn't mean that you won't feel pain anymore, but rather that you'll learn to deal with it without letting yourself be consumed. Instead of resisting suffering, you accept it as part of the human experience and allow it to pass without destroying you. It gives you a freedom that few people achieve. But how to develop this detachment in practice? The key is in presence. The more you live in the present moment, the less you cling to what has passed or what has not yet happened. Much of human suffering comes from the mind stuck in the past or anxious about the future. When you ground yourself in the now, you realize that most problems only exist in your own interpretation. Acceptance is also an essential factor. Accepting does not mean resignation or conformism, but rather recognizing reality without resistance. When something doesn't go as expected, you can choose to get frustrated or simply accept the situation and seek the best possible solution. When someone walks away, You can either hold on to the pain of loss or accept that this was the natural trajectory of that relationship. And finally, it is important to remember that the true power is within you. No external situation can make you suffer without your permission. No person can make you feel inferior without you believing in it. When you take on this responsibility, you discover that you are much stronger than you imagined. And then, the moment comes when you look back and realize that everything has changed. The things that once shook you don't have as much of an impact anymore. You feel a lightness that you have never experienced before. You understand that you don't have to control everything, that you don't need anyone's approval, that you don't have to carry unnecessary weights. It is at this moment that you truly free yourself. And now that we've come this far, there's only one last piece left to close this journey with clarity and purpose. Let's go to the conclusion. We have reached the end of this journey of self-knowledge and transformation, but in fact, this is just the beginning. What we explore here is not just a set of philosophical ideas or abstract concepts, but a real and applicable path for you to become someone truly free, someone who nothing and no one can hurt again. Carl Jung showed us that emotional pain does not come from what happens around us, but from the way we interpret and react to these experiences. When we live on autopilot, we are constantly affected by opinions, rejections, frustrations, and fears because we do not understand what is going on inside us. But when we become aware of our own patterns, repressed emotions, and limiting beliefs, we find that we have much more control over our life than we imagined. The key to this transformation lies in 3 pillars: self-knowledge, self-mastery, and detachment. First, we need to see ourselves honestly, recognizing our shadows, insecurities, and unconscious patterns. Then we learn not to react impulsively, to observe our emotions before we get swept up in them. And finally, we let go of what we cannot control, accepting reality with more lightness and less suffering. This does not mean that we will never feel pain again, but rather that we will learn to deal with it differently. Instead of resisting, repressing our emotions, or blaming the external world, we learn to embrace them, understand them, and move forward without carrying unnecessary weights. With this, we become more balanced, safer, and more resilient people. And the most amazing thing is that this change not only transforms your life, but also the impact you have on the world. When you don't let yourself be affected by provocations, conflicts, or unrealistic expectations, the people around you perceive this strength. You become a presence that inspires confidence and serenity. You start to deal better with any situation, because you understand that nothing external has the power to define who you are. Now, the next step is in your hands. You can choose to continue living in the same way, automatically reacting to everything that happens, feeling hostage to emotions and circumstances. Or you can take the first step toward developing that new mindset and start practicing self-observation, self-mastery, and detachment in your daily life. If this content made sense to you, if it brought some clarity or a new look at your own life, don't keep it just to yourself. Share it with someone who might also benefit from this message. And, of course, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that will help you grow and evolve even more. Remember, nothing and no one can hurt you if you don't allow it. True freedom is within you. Now, go and live with that awareness.